Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Machine. The familiar scent of ozone and hot metal was Tony Stark's incense. Below him, the glittering expanse of Manhattan was a circuit board he had long since mastered, a testament to a world he understood, a world governed by physics, finance, and the occasional need for a percussive application of repulsor technology. In his penthouse workshop, surrounded by holographic schematics and the deferential hum of his own genius, Tony was a god in his machine. Jarvis, run the energy distribution diagnostic on the Mark VII's left repulsor assembly again, he said, not looking up from the gauntlet he was recalibrating. A bead of sweat traced a path through the grease on his temple. I'm still getting a 0.02% power fluctuation under simulated atmospheric stress. It's sloppy. Already running, sir. The disembodied voice of his AI butler replied, its synthesized British accent a calming constant in his chaotic life. Asterisk, perhaps if you weren't attempting to overclock the stabilization matrix to play Galaga, the readings would remain within acceptable parameters. Asterisk. Tony smirked, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface, manipulating lines of code like a conductor. Acceptable is the C+ of engineering, Jay. We aim for the dean's list, with a minor in kicking alien ass. Besides, I had the high score. It had been 6 years since the Battle of New York. 6 years of being Iron Man, the world's most advanced weapon, and its most charismatic protector. 6 years of press conferences, late-night talk shows, and the constant, gnawing responsibility of it all. He'd built a legion of suits, privatized world peace, and dated a veritable United Nations of supermodels. He was on top of the world, a peak so high the air was thin and the only thing to look at was his own reflection. It was starting to get a little boring. And then, the world broke. It didn't happen with a bang, but with a whisper. A flicker. Sir. Jarvis's voice cut through the rock music blasting from the workshop speakers, a note of something Tony had never heard before creeping into its modulation, confusion. Asterisk, I am detecting an anomaly. Asterisk. If it's another encrypted message from Fury, tell him I'm on sabbatical in a dimension of my own awesomeness. Tony quipped, tightening a micro-servomotor. Asterisk? Negative, sir. The anomaly is internal. It has bypassed all external and internal security protocols. It appears to be manifesting on the central workbench. Asterisk. Tony froze. Bypassed his security? Impossible. He had firewalls that could repel a government-level cyber attack and physical defenses that made Fort Knox look like a garden shed. He spun around in his chair. On the gleaming chrome surface of his primary workbench, where a moment ago there was nothing but a schematic for a new arc reactor, lay a letter. It was ancient. The parchment was the color of old bone, brittle and heavy. It was sealed not with adhesive but with a dollop of deep crimson wax, stamped with a delicate, unfamiliar crest, a doe, graceful and proud. His name, Anthony E. Stark, was written across the front in an elegant emerald green script that struck a chord of memory, so deep and so old it felt like a physical blow. Tony stood slowly, his heart hammering a strange, forgotten rhythm against his ribs. Jarvis, scan it. Full spectrum analysis. Origin. Material composition. Energy signature. Everything. Asterisk scanning. Sir, the results are inconclusive. Asterisk. Define inconclusive. Tony's voice was sharp. Jarvis was never inconclusive. Asterisk, the material does not correspond to any known paper or vellum. It registers as organic, yet inert. The ink displays properties of both a plant-based dye and liquid metal. There is no residual energy signature, yet its sudden appearance violates the second law of thermodynamics. It is, for all intents and purposes, physically impossible. Asterisk. Tony approached the bench, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. He recognized the handwriting. He hadn't seen it in nearly 2 decades, but you don't forget the hand that once wrote scientific equations on a cocktail napkin that could have rewritten the laws of energy conversion. Lily Evans. The brilliant, infuriating, flame-haired biochemist from Oxford he'd met at a technology summit. A whirlwind romance of 2 supernova intellects colliding. They had argued about quantum entanglement, designed a theoretical clean energy siphon on the back of a menu, and fallen in love with a ferocity that had terrified him. Then, Just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. A letter, a real one this time, left on his pillow. Asterisk, this world of yours, Tony, it's too bright. It's too loud. I'll burn in it. And so will you, if you stay too close to me. I have to go. Forget me. Asterisk. He never had. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he picked up the letter. The parchment was cool and smooth beneath his calloused fingertips. He broke the wax seal. The scent that wafted up was not of paper or dust, but of something he couldn't name. Old stone, rain-soaked earth, and a faint, floral hint of lily. He unfolded the single sheet of parchment. The same emerald ink flowed across the page. My dearest Tony, asterisk, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. The enchantments have fallen, and I am gone. I imagine you are confused, perhaps angry. You have every right to be. I lied to you, my love, not with my heart, but with my very nature. The world I come from, the one I had to return to, is not one of science and steel, but of magic and shadow asterisk. Tony's breath hitched. Magic. He scanned the room for hidden cameras, for pranksters. This had to be a joke. A cruel, elaborate hoax. But the impossible object in his hands felt devastatingly real. He kept reading, his eyes devouring the words. Asterisk, I am a witch, Tony. A truth I hid to protect you. My world was at war, ruled by a madman, a self-proclaimed Dark Lord who sought to purify our society by exterminating those he deemed unworthy. I was a target. Anyone close to me was a target. I left to keep the crosshairs off your back, asterisk. Asterisk, but that is not the most important lie, I must confess. When I left you, I was carrying a part of us both. We had a son, Tony. His name was Harry. He had my eyes, but your hair, that stubborn, untamable black mop that you were always so proud of. He was brilliant. He was brave. He was everything good in both of us, asterisk. The world tilted on its axis. The workshop, his sanctuary of logic and reason, seemed to ripple and distort. Asson. He had a son. The words were a physical impact, stealing the air from his lungs. Harry. A phantom limb he never knew he'd lost was suddenly screaming with agony. Asterisk, we lived in hiding, under the strongest protections I could weave. But the Dark Lord, a monster who calls himself Voldemort, found us. It was Halloween. I don't have time to explain the prophecy that marked my boy, the betrayal that led him to our door. He came for Harry. My husband, James, died trying to give us time. And then he came for me, asterisk. Asterisk, I used an old, powerful magic, a magic rooted in love, to shield our son. My life for his. And it worked. The killing curse Voldemort cast at Harry rebounded. It destroyed the monster's body, but not his soul. My last act on this earth was to save our boy, asterisk. Tony's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, the letter shaking violently in his grip. His son. His son had faced down a Dark Lord? It sounded like something out of a comic book, a fantasy novel. But the pain blooming in his chest, a sharp, tearing grief for a life he never knew, was horrifically real. Asterisk, Harry survived. He was taken to live with my sister, to be kept safe until he was old enough to re-enter the magical world. But I am writing this from a place beyond time, a final message woven into the very fabric of our home's protections, set to deliver only upon their complete and final failure. If you are reading this, it means the protections have fallen. It means the hiding place is no longer safe. It means something has happened to Harry, asterisk. Asterisco no. I can feel it even from here. The echo of his life is gone. He murdered him, Tony. That monster came back, and he finished the job. He killed our son, asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know why I'm telling you this. For closure? For a witness to our boy's life? Or maybe it's for revenge. You once told me that the only thing you couldn't engineer was a solution to a problem you didn't understand. Well, here is the problem. His name is Lord Voldemort. He leads an army of fanatics called Death Eaters. They believe in blood purity and power through fear. They use magic to torture and kill. They murdered our family, asterisk. Asterisk, I have enclosed my journals. They are magically sealed, but they will open for you. For his father, they will teach you what I can't. They will show you the world that took our son from us, asterisk. Asterisk, do with this what you will. Avenge him. Or mourn him and live your life. I could never ask you to fight a war that isn't yours. But he was your son, Tony. He was our Harry, asterisk. All my love, even in death. Lily. The letter fell from his numb fingers and drifted to the floor. Tony stared at the empty space in front of him, but he wasn't seeing the New York skyline. He was seeing a boy with his hair and Lily's eyes. A ghost. A life he should have had. A future stolen from him by a monster with a stupid, theatrical name. Silence descended upon the workshop. The music was off. The hum of machinery seemed distant. Even Jarvis was quiet, as if sensing the magnitude of the singularity that had just occurred in its creator's soul. Jarvis, Tony said, his voice a raw, broken rasp. Asterisk, yes, sir. Asterisk. Scan the letter again. Cross-reference the name Lily Evans with all known associates from the years 1979 to 1981. Search for birth records. A son. Named Harry. Search for anything. Asterisk, sir, I have already run those parameters. There are no records. No hospital visitations. No birth certificate for a Harry Evans, Potter, or Stark from that time period associated with her. Social security, passport applications. Nothing. It is as if they never existed. Asterisk. They did exist, Tony whispered, the words tasting like ash. He bent down and picked up the letter, his movements stiff and robotic. Tucked inside the last fold was a small, thick leather-bound book. A journal. He ran a thumb over the cover. It was warm to the touch. As his skin made contact, a faint, golden light traced the edges of the book, and the clasp clicked open. The grief was a physical thing. It was a shard of ice in his heart, a crushing weight on his chest. For a moment, it threatened to drown him. The Tony Stark the world knew would have deflected with a joke, built a wall of sarcasm, and then quietly drunk himself into oblivion. But the man sitting in the workshop was not that Tony Stark. He was a father who had just learned of his son's birth and death in the same gut-wrenching breath. The grief was there, a cold, dark star in the center of his being. But around it, something else was beginning to coalesce. Something hot and sharp and familiar. Rage. It was a clean, pure fury, an engineer's rage at a flawed system. A system called magic that had allowed his son to be murdered. A system that had hidden a whole world from him. A system that operated on hocus pocus and fear. A system that had an operator named Voldemort. He stood up, his body moving with a new, terrible purpose. He strode over to the main holographic design table. Jarvis, he commanded, his voice devoid of all its usual levity. It was cold, flat, and hard as forged steel. Scrub the Mark 8 schematics. Asterisk, sir? Asterisk. You heard me. Erase them. We're starting over. A new project. He flicked his wrist, and a three-dimensional wireframe of the Iron Man armor shimmered into existence, rotating slowly in the air. It was a masterpiece of modern technology. And against the world that had just declared war on him, it was a paper airplane. This world Lily wrote about. It's a society of primitives using an unquantified, powerful energy source. They call it magic. I'm going to call it a variable. And I'm going to solve for it. He began to pull the armor apart, piece by virtual piece. The gold titanium alloy is a great start, but it's not enough. We need to integrate a non-conductive ceramic substrate. Something that can insulate against directed energy that doesn't follow the inverse square law. His fingers flew across the holographic controls, new materials and components appearing and snapping into place. Power source. The arc reactor is efficient, but the EM field it generates might be susceptible to magical interference. We need to shield it. A Faraday cage is kindergarten stuff. I'm talking about a quantum state energy containment field. We'll generate a localized reality distortion to insulate the reactor from any external paraphysical influence. He stripped away the standard missile pods and repulsor cannons. Their weapons are spells. Curses. They rely on intent. How do you counter intent? You don't. You counter the delivery system. We need countermeasures. Wide-spectrum energy dampeners. Sonic disruptors tuned to frequencies that could shatter the concentration of a wizard. We need non-magical offensive options. Kinetic kill projectiles. Tungsten carbide. Hypervelocity. No spell is going to stop a fist-sized chunk of metal traveling at Mach 5. The new suit taking shape in the air was bulkier, more aggressive. Sleek lines were replaced with angular, layered plating. The familiar hot rod red was gone, replaced by a stark, menacing combination of graphite gray and burnished silver. It looked less like a superhero and more like a high-tech Grim Reaper. "Sir," Jarvis interjected, a hint of digital concern in its tone. The energy requirements for these proposed systems are astronomical, and the design philosophy seems to be exceptionally aggressive. Aggressive is the point, Jay, Tony said, his eyes glowing with the reflected light of the hologram, a terrifying, predatory fire burning within them. He looked at the name on the letter. Voldemort. This isn't about protection. It's not about defense. This is pest control. He zoomed in on the new helmet design, tweaking the sensor suite. I'll need to analyze their energy. We need a full-spectrum thaumaturgical scanner. Something that can read magical signatures like a spectrograph reads light. I need to see their magic, understand it, and then I need to build a better version of it. He worked for hours, then a full day, then 2. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just built. He poured all his pain, all his grief for the son he never knew, and all his cold, brilliant rage into the machine taking shape before him. It was a monument to a murdered child. It was a declaration of war. Finally, he stopped. The new design was complete. The Arcane Response Suit, Mark I. He christened it the Argent Sentinel. He looked over at Lily's journal, sitting on the bench. His guide. His mission briefing. Jarvis, he said, his voice a low growl. Book me a flight to London. Private hangar. Top-of-the-line mobile fabrication unit. Ship the prototype components ahead of me. Diplomatic courier, highest priority. Destination, sir? Tony picked up the journal, his knuckles white. He didn't know this world. He didn't know its rules. But he knew how to break them. He knew how to find a monster and dismantle it, piece by bloody piece. We're going hunting, he said. Start a new mission file. Codename, Requiem. Chapter 2, The Leaky Cauldron. The London air was a damp, gray concoction of exhaust fumes and history, a far cry from the crisp, vertical world of Manhattan. For Tony Stark, sealed within the climate-controlled sanctuary of the Mark 8 armor, it was merely data. Atmospheric particulate count, 212 ppm. Humidity, 87%. Probability of rain, 100%. He stood in a grimy alley off Charing Cross Road, a shimmering distortion in the gloom, the suit's experimental optic camouflage bending light around its polished crimson and gold frame. All right, Jay, give me the rundown, Tony murmured, his voice a low hum inside the helmet. Sir, sensory data remains anomalous, Jarvis replied, his synthesized voice tinged with a digital equivalent of confusion. I am detecting a concentration of energy unlike anything in our databases. It is not electromagnetic, nuclear, or kinetic in the traditional sense. It seems to be emanating from that dilapidated pub. Tony's eyes, augmented by the helmet's display, focused on the establishment in question. To any passing Londoner, the Leaky Cauldron was a grimy, forgotten relic, wedged between a bookstore and a record shop, its sign so faded it was practically illegible. But to his suit's arcane sensors, a technology reverse-engineered from the residual magic on Lily's letter, it blazed like a miniature sun. Lily called it a threshold, Tony mused, the name a familiar ache in his chest. A place that exists in both worlds. Let's see if they have anything stronger than Earl Grey. Dropping the camouflage, the Mark 8 materialized with a whisper-quiet hiss of servos. The armor, sleeker and more angular than its predecessors, was coated in a non-reflective material etched with microscopic, gold-inlaid channels. These weren't for aerodynamics. They were designed to actively bleed off magical energy, a Faraday cage for spells. He'd named it the Arcane Model. It felt fitting. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The transition was jarring. The scent of stale beer and sawdust hit him first, followed by the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. The pub was dark and shabby, lit by sputtering candles that cast long, dancing shadows. But it was the patrons that made his internal processors whir. Wizards and witches in pointed hats and long robes nursed smoking goblets, eyeing him with expressions ranging from slack-jawed shock to outright hostility. The 21st century had just collided with the 17th. Either I took a wrong turn into a Renaissance fair, or we've hit the jackpot, Jay, Tony quipped under his breath. He strode towards the bar, each step a heavy metallic thud that silenced the room. The bartender, a stooped man with a gummy smile, looked as if he'd swallowed a bludger. "What in Merlin's name are you?" the man stammered. "Thirsty." Tony's voice boomed through the suit's external speaker, modulated to be deep and intimidating. "What's your strongest drink that won't dissolve my internal wiring?" Before the bartender could answer, a cold, cruel voice cut through the tense silence. "Muggles. They grow bolder. And noisier." Tony turned. Seated at a corner table was a man with a sallow, pockmarked face and heavy-lidded eyes that held a deep, chilling emptiness. His robes were of fine make, but they couldn't hide the predatory stillness of a wolf waiting for a rabbit to stray too close. He was flanked by two others, brutish men who looked like they used their own foreheads to tenderize meat. "Sir, I am cross-referencing facial recognition databases," Jarvis said calmly in his ear. "The central figure is Antonin Dolohov, a known associate of the terrorist cell Lily's letter, identified as Death Eaters. Multiple international warrants for acts of extreme violence." "Bingo. I'm sorry, were you talking to me?" Tony asked, his helmet turning to face Dolohov directly. "I don't speak inbred zealot. Can you translate?" Dolohov's lip curled into a sneer. He rose slowly, drawing a thin stick of dark wood from his sleeve. A wand. It looked like a child's toy. "You will learn to respect your betters, filth. Or you will learn to scream." Threats. "How quaint," Tony said, taking a deliberate step forward. "Here's a counteroffer. You sit down, shut up, and tell me everything you know about the man who calls himself Voldemort. Do that, and I'll let you walk out of here with most of your teeth." Laughter, harsh and humorless, echoed from the corner. "You dare speak the Dark Lord's name with your filthy tongue?" Dolohov raised his wand. "Let's see how your metal toy handles the killing CU, *oof*. Tony hadn't moved a visible muscle, but a micro-repulsor, mounted on his gauntlet and calibrated to a non-lethal concussive blast, had fired. The air cracked like a whip. Dolohov was slammed back into his chair, the wand clattering from his numb fingers. His two hulking companions stared in disbelief for a second before lunging forward, wands raised. One shouted, *stupefy, *. A jet of red light shot from his wand. "Energy signature analyzed," Jarvis reported. "High-velocity projection of what appears to be pure concussive force, wrapped in a biointeractive shell. Shielding is holding at 98%. The red bolt splashed harmlessly against Tony's chest plate, dissipating in a shower of sparks. The other wizard bellowed an incantation that sounded like a cat being strangled, and a torrent of green sparks erupted towards Tony. The arcane suit's channels glowed gold as they siphoned the energy away, grounding it. "My turn," Tony said. He raised his left hand, and a trio of silver discs, no bigger than coins, shot from his wrist. They zipped through the air, embedding themselves in the wooden wall behind the two wizards with a solid thunk. A moment later, they emitted a high-frequency sonic pulse. Both men dropped to the floor, hands clamped over their ears, groaning in agony. The pub was in an uproar. Patrons scrambled for the exits, overturning tables and chairs. Dolohov, recovering, snatched his wand and his face contorted with rage. Crucio. This time the spell was different. A bolt of crimson light, crackling with malice, struck the Mark 8. "Warning! Bioresonant frequency detected." Jarvis shrieked, his voice distorting with static. Attempting to bypass the shield and interface directly with occupant's nervous system. Excruciating pain imminent. For a fraction of a second, Tony felt it, an icy phantom of agony, a ghost in his machine. It was the echo of a curse designed to shred a person from the inside out. His teeth clenched. Rage, cold and pure, washed over him. The memory of Lily's elegant script describing her son's murder burned in his mind. Asterisk, they used this on him. On my boy, asterisk. J. Rear up primary power to the chest unibeam. Tight focus, low yield, he growled. The reactor in his chest glowed a brilliant, piercing blue. A pencil-thin beam of pure energy shot out, not at Dolohov, but at the heavy oak table in front of him. The wood instantly superheated, exploding into a cloud of splinters and steam. Dolohov cried out, shielding his face as the blast threw him against the back wall, where he slumped, dazed and bleeding. Tony stood over him, the blue light of the reactor casting an unholy glow in the dim pub. That was a warning. The next one goes through your chest. Where is Voldemort? Dolohov spat a wad of blood onto the floor. The Dark Lord will find you. He will flay the skin from your bones for this insolence. He can get in line, Tony said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He knelt, his armored fingers wrapping around Dolohov's throat. Let me rephrase. Give me a location. A base. A supply depot. Anything. Or I start removing pieces of you. Let's see if magic can grow back a spinal cord. A new voice, dry and laced with a weary cynicism, spoke from the shadows near the bar. He won't tell you anything. His sort values loyalty born of terror above self-preservation. It's their single most idiotic and predictable trait. Tony looked up. Leaning against the bar, seemingly the only person who hadn't fled, was a man in his late 20s. He was thin, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held a perpetually unimpressed expression. His clothes were a mismatched collection of worn Muggle attire, a tweed jacket over a faded band t-shirt that looked out of place even in this bizarre establishment. He held a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey. He hadn't flinched once during the entire confrontation. And you are? Tony asked, not releasing his grip on Dolohov. The man who's going to tell you that you've just declared war on a nation of paranoids with the technological equivalent of a sledgehammer, the man said, taking a sip of his drink. My name is Alistair Finch. And you, whoever you are the most interesting thing to happen in this pub since Gideon Pruitt tried to bewitch a pint of ale to refill itself and accidentally summoned a flock of angry puffins. Tony's internal scanners were already running. No energy signature. No one. He was a baseline human. You're not one of them. Alistair gave a short, bitter laugh. No. I'm a squib. The magical world's equivalent of a dud firecracker. All the heritage, none of the spark. Which gives me a unique perspective. I can see what they can't. Which is that you're not just a muggle in a tin can, Alistair said, his eyes tracing the glowing channels on the armor. That shield of yours, it's not passive. It's active. It's not just blocking the magic. It's analyzing and redirecting it. You've created a Faraday cage for the soul. They see a vulgar machine. I see a paradigm shift. Tony slowly stood, releasing Dolohov, who slumped to the floor, unconscious. The sonic emitters deactivated, and the two thugs lay groaning. He retracted his faceplate with a hiss of pneumatics, revealing his own face to the squib. Alistair's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, his cynical mask slipped, replaced by genuine shock. Stark? Tony Stark? Well, that explains the budget and the dramatic entrance. He shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. Of course it's you. I should have known. No one else has that particular brand of theatrical recklessness. You know who I am, Tony stated, less a question than a confirmation. I make it a point to study the world that works, Alistair said, gesturing vaguely at the chaotic pub. Unlike this lot, who think the integrated circuit is a rather nasty type of skin disease. I used to work for their ministry, or a support division. I proposed a program to integrate mundane technology, ballistics, surveillance, basic computational analysis, into their operations. They called my theories radical and dangerous and showed me the door. Said I was trying to poison magic with muggle filth. The bitterness was back, sharp and potent. Tony saw a reflection of himself, a mind ostracized for being ahead of its time. So you're a disgraced genius with a chip on your shoulder who understands both worlds, Tony surmised. You're either going to be my greatest asset or a spectacular pain in my ass. I endeavor to be both, Alistair replied smoothly. You, on the other hand, are a bowl in a china shop filled with dynamite. You just assaulted a high-ranking lieutenant of the most feared wizard in a century in the most popular magical pub in London. The Aurors will be here in minutes, followed shortly by Voldemort's personal assassins. You have no cover, no allies, and I suspect a very superficial understanding of what you're up against. I understand that a monster named Voldemort murdered someone I cared about. Tony corrected himself, the words catching in his throat. I'm here to systematically dismantle his entire operation. I have the technology, the resources, and the motive. What I don't have is a map. Alistair studied him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. He looked at the wreckage, at the unconscious Death Eaters, and at the impossible man in the impossible suit of armor. He saw the grief hiding behind the billionaire's bravado, the cold fire of vengeance in his eyes. He saw a weapon of unimaginable power aimed squarely at the heart of the world that had cast him out. You're not just looking for a map, Stark, Alistair said, a glint of excitement in his eyes. You're looking for a guide. A translator. Someone to tell you which ancient runes are load-bearing and which ones are just graffiti. Are you applying for the job? I am, Alistair said, draining his glass. Because I've spent the last 5 years writing theoretical papers on how to do exactly what you're trying to do. Papers that got me laughed out of every respectable institution in this world. You, Mr. Stark, are my walking, talking, repulsor-blasting vindication. Sirens began to wail in the distance, the mundane kind. The Aurors would be more subtle. We need to leave. Now, Alistair said, his tone shifting to one of urgent practicality. They'll be able to trace the energy signature from your little light show. I don't run, Tony said, his faceplate sliding shut. This isn't running. It's a tactical relocation, Alistair countered. You can't fight a war from a pub alley. You need a base. A lab. A place they would never think to look. And you know a place? Tony's modulated voice asked. A wicked grin spread across Alistair's face. Oh, I know the perfect place. It was an old safe house, abandoned by the Ministry decades ago. They left because the ambient energy was too unstable for reliable spellcasting. Unstable how? It's built directly on top of the old Bankside Power Station's main grid junction, Alistair explained, his eyes gleaming with intellectual triumph. All that muggle filth, the raw, chaotic electromagnetic field, it plays hell with their magic. But for someone like you? For someone who wants to build weapons that feed on energy and are shielded from theirs. He chuckled. For you, Stark, it's not a cursed ground. It's a fortress. Tony felt the first genuine spark of something other than grief or rage ignite within him. It was the thrill of a new problem, a new challenge, a new design. A fortress powered by the very thing his enemies feared, hidden in plain sight. Finch, Tony said, the name already feeling like a designation. Get me the address. You're hired. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The base of operations was a testament to Tony's particular brand of genius and Alistair's begrudging pragmatism. Carved out beneath an abandoned mundane telephone exchange in Bristol, a city Alistair assured him was aggressively unmagical, it was a stark cathedral of bleeding-edge technology. Holographic displays flickered over ancient brickwork, and the hum of a prototype arc reactor core provided clean, untraceable power, a silent rebuke to the sputtering candlelight of the wizarding world. Malfoy Manor, Tony announced, swiping a hand through the air. A three-dimensional schematic of a sprawling, Gothic estate materialized between them, rotating slowly. It was rendered in ghostly blue light, dotted with angry red indicators. Built on a confluence of ley lines, which I'm starting to think is just magical for prime real estate with good reception. The whole property is drowning in what my sensors are flagging as ambient thaumaturgical radiation. Alistair Finch, perched on a stool and nursing a cup of tea so strong it could dissolve lead, squinted at the display. Was? Stark. Not radiation. Ancient, layered, and saturated with pure blood malice. There are anti-apparition jinxes, intruder disintegration curses, probably a blood-boiling hex tied to the welcome mat. The Malfoys have been refining their security since William the Conqueror. Gih. My security has been refined since last Tuesday, Tony retorted, tapping a console. The red indicators pulsed. These are the hotspots. The main wardstone is buried somewhere under the east wing, acting like a central server. It's broadcasting a constant keep-out signal that plays havoc with anything more complex than a calculator. Jarvis can't get a signal through, and the mini-drones I sent in either fried or came back babbling about the existential dread of peacocks. Alistair took a slow sip. I told you. You can't brute force magic. I'm not, Tony said, a grin spreading across his face. He held up a sleek, metallic disc the size of a hockey puck. I'm giving it a logic problem it can't solve. This is a null field generator. Instead of fighting the wards, it projects a localized bubble of nothing. It convinces the magic in a 5-meter radius that it doesn't actually exist. For a few precious seconds, the spells forget what they're supposed to be doing, giving me a window to walk right through. Alistair's eyebrows climbed his forehead. You weaponized an existential crisis for enchantments. I put metaphysics in a headlock. Now the mission. We're not there to make a statement. Not yet. This is a smash and grab, but we're smashing their data and grabbing their assets. He zoomed in on a heavily fortified section of the Manor's dungeon level. Lily's journals mentioned that the Inner Circle, the Death Eaters, use their personal vaults as more than just banks. They're armories, laboratories, and secure dead drops. Malfoy is Voldemort's chief financial backer. We cut off the money. We destabilize the network. You say that as if you're planning to rob a bank, Alistair scoffed. You're talking about breaking into a fortress that would make the goblins at Gringotts nervous. Alistair, I own several banks, Tony said, a flicker of the old pre-grief playboy in his eyes. This is just pest control with a better ROI. That night, the air over Wiltshire was cold and damp, smelling of rain and old stone. The Mark IV arcane armor was a phantom against the moonless sky. Its matte black plating, etched with circuits of refined silver and cold iron, absorbed light and radar, but its true innovation was the layered shielding within. The outer shell would deflect physical attacks, but the shimmering, barely visible field beneath it was designed to dissipate magical energy, converting curses into harmless bursts of heat and light. Tony landed with a whisper of hydraulics in a copse of trees a kilometer from the Manor's ornate gates. Alistair was already there, huddled in a thick coat and looking profoundly miserable. He held a small, twitching device. The wards are active. Strong as ever, Alistair reported, his voice tight. They feel greasy. Greasy is not a scientific metric, Finch. Tony's voice came through Alistair's earpiece, filtered and metallic. But I'll take your word for it. He walked towards the shimmering barrier that was invisible to the naked eye but screamed across his suit's sensors. It was a chaotic wall of energy, unpredictable and alive. All right, Jarvis, give me the overture. Asterisk null field generator primed and synchronized with the forward shield emitter, sir. Asterisk, the AI's calm voice announced inside Tony's helmet. Asterisk projection window estimated at 4.7 seconds. Asterisk. Showtime. Tony raised his palm. The null field disc on his gauntlet spun up with a low hum that seemed to drink the sound from the air. A sphere of perfect blackness erupted from it, hitting the wards. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the very fabric of the air seemed to tear. The ward buckled, its magical energies swirling into the void like water down a drain. A 5-meter hole of calm, ordinary night appeared in the magical tempest. Tony stepped through, the field collapsing behind him with a sound like shattering glass. Alistair followed, stumbling slightly. Bloody hell, the squib breathed, looking back at the now seamless barrier. It worked. Doubt is a luxury we can't afford, Tony said, his sensors already mapping the Manor's interior. Let's go find the dragon's horde. They moved like ghosts across the perfectly manicured lawns, past albino peacocks that hissed at their passing. The Manor was a monument to arrogant wealth and dark power. Inside, the air was cold and stagnant. Portraits of sneering, pale-faced wizards watched them pass, their painted eyes following with unnerving focus. They're tracking us, Alistair whispered, glancing at a portrait of a wizard with a long, cruel nose. Let them, Tony replied. I've got a low-level cognitive dampener running. To them, we just look like a pair of particularly uninteresting house elves going about our business. They descended into the dungeons, the polished stone giving way to rough-hewn rock. The air grew colder still, thick with the metallic tang of old blood and something else to spare. It was a feeling, an oppressive weight that had nothing to do with the temperature. Tony, a man of science, found the sensation illogical and deeply unsettling. The vault door was a slab of obsidian etched with runes that writhed like living snakes. A complex magical lock pulsed at its center. This one requires a blood sacrifice and a parcel of the Malfoy family's soul, spoken in Parseltongue, Alistair said grimly. We're not getting through that. Soul parcels are above my pay grade, Tony said, raising his hand. A high-frequency laser, pencil-thin and blindingly bright, shot from his repulsor. It didn't cut the stone. Instead, it meticulously traced the seams of the doorframe. The screech of superheated rock filled the corridor. After 10 seconds, Tony braced his hands against the door and pushed. With a groan of tortured metal hinges, the entire 2-ton assembly, frame and all, ripped out of the wall and crashed to the floor. Alistair stared, open-mouthed. Or, you could do that. The vault's interior was a treasure trove of darkness. Shelves overflowed with cursed necklaces, whispering skulls, and books bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Piles of gold galleons glinted in the beam of Tony's chest plate, but he ignored them. This wasn't about money. It was about power. Jarvis, start scanning. I want a full spectral analysis of every object in here. Flag anything with high residual energy, unusual elemental composition, or a tendency to whisper threats. Asterisk cataloging in progress, sir. Asterisk. As the suit's systems worked, a faint noise reached them. A soft, rhythmic thump-thump-thump. It was coming from a small, locked alcove at the back of the vault. What's that? Alistair asked. Tony used a micro-torch to slice the lock. Inside, a small creature was methodically banging its head against the stone wall. It was barely humanoid, with skin like wrinkled parchment, enormous, tennis ball eyes brimming with tears, and long bat-like ears. It wore a filthy, tattered pillowcase. The creature froze, turning its gaze on them. Fear, stark and absolute, radiated from it. Dobby has been bad. Dobby was making noise. Dobby must be punished, it squeaked, reaching for a heavier rock. Whoa, hey, easy there, Dobby, Tony said, his voice instinctively softening. He knelt, the servos in his armor whining softly. The scale was absurd. A walking weapon of mass destruction facing a creature that looked like it would lose a fight with a strong breeze. Nobody's going to punish you. The house elf stared at him, its huge, green eyes wide with confusion. You are not Master Malfoy. No. Definitely not, Tony said. He looked at the creature's bony limbs, covered in old scars and fresh bruises. He saw the ingrained terror in its posture. This wasn't a soldier. This wasn't a combatant. This was a slave, brutalized and broken. In his crusade against Voldemort's grand, theatrical evil, he'd barely considered the mundane, daily cruelty that propped it up. The casual horror of it hit him harder than any curse could. This was what they were fighting for. Not an abstract concept of good, but for this small, terrified creature's right not to have to beat itself against a wall. His son Harry would have grown up in this world. Would he have accepted this? Or would he, like Lily, have fought against it? The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. Asterisk, sir, asterisk, Jarvis interrupted, his voice clipped. Asterisk, multiple life signs approaching. 3 individuals. They have just entered the manor, asterisk. Malfoy's home early, Alistair hissed. Tony stood up, the warmth he'd shown the elf vanishing, replaced by cold fury. Dobby, stay here. Don't make a sound. We'll be back for you. He sealed the alcove with a low-power plasma weld, just enough to hold. Finch, get to the exit. I'll handle the welcome party. Stark, don't. This was always part of the plan, Tony said, his faceplate snapping shut. Phase 2. Make a statement. He met them in the grand entrance hall. Lucius Malfoy stood flanked by 2 hulking figures, his silver-knobbed cane held tight in one hand, a wand in the other. His aristocratic features were contorted with rage. A mudblood and a filthy squib thought they could defile my home? Malfoy sneered, his eyes scanning the empty hall. Show yourselves, cowards. Technically, I'm a muggle. Tony's voice boomed from the shadows of the upper gallery. But I'm willing to overlook the slur if you surrender now. It'll save me from scuffing your floors. He dropped to the ground, landing with a heavy clang of metal on marble that echoed through the hall. The three wizards stared, their wands raised, their arrogance momentarily short-circuited by the sight of the dark, metal golem before them. "What in Salazar's name is that?" one of the thugs, Crab or Goyle, grunted. "A vulgar muggle toy," Lucius spat, regaining his composure. "Destroy it." Avada Kedavra. A jet of sickening green light shot from his wand. Tony didn't even flinch. The spell hit the armor's chest plate and dissipated in a harmless shower of emerald sparks, absorbed and grounded by the arcane shielding. The arc reactor in his chest glowed a little brighter. Lucius Malfoy's jaw fell open. The killing curse was absolute. It was unstoppable. It did not fail. "My turn," Tony said. He didn't use lasers or missiles. He raised his gauntlet, and a device shot out, not a weapon, but a small projector. It hit the floor and activated, enveloping the three wizards in a localized acoustic field. An agonizingly high-pitched shriek, calibrated to be unbearable to the human nervous system, filled the bubble of air around them. They dropped their wands, clutching their heads and screaming, collapsing to their knees. Tony walked over to the writhing Malfoy patriarch and picked up his wand. He snapped it in two with a casual crunch of his metal fingers. "Let's talk about your finances," Tony said, his voice a low, menacing growl through the suit's external speakers. He leaned in close, his glowing blue eyelets boring into Malfoy's terrified gaze. "Consider them liquidated. And if I ever hear that you've laid a hand on that house elf in the basement again, my next visit will be significantly less polite. I'm confiscating your assets, your dark magic toys, and your dignity. You can keep the peacocks." He turned and walked away, leaving the three wizards incapacitated, but alive on the floor. Revenge was a cold dish, but tonight, justice felt surprisingly warm. Back in the Bristol sanctuary, the hall was even better than they'd hoped. Holograms displayed the molecular and magical signatures of dozens of dark artifacts, now safely contained in a temporal stasis field in the corner of the lab. Alistair, buzzing with a mixture of terror and vindicated excitement, was cross-referencing their findings with his own research. He had a hand of glory, 3 cursed opals, and a book that Jarvis has classified as a cognitohazard, Alistair said, giddy. "This will set their operations back months." Tony wasn't listening. He was staring at a different screen, watching a translated manifest from one of Malfoy's hidden ledgers. It was a list of acquisitions, items procured not for himself, but for his master. Most were rare potion ingredients or cursed relics. But one entry stood out, a transaction dated over a decade ago. Item: Locket of Salazar Slytherin. Asterisk description: heavy gold, serpentines inlaid with green stones. Resists all mundane and magical attempts at destruction. Emits faint whisper of parseltongue when handled. Asterisk. Status: entrusted to the care of RAB for safeguarding in a location known only to the Dark Lord. He cross-referenced the description with a specific page from Lily's journals, a frantic, scribbled entry about Voldemort's research into a vile branch of soul magic. Horcruxes. Objects used to house a piece of a wizard's soul, granting them a form of immortality. "Lily," he whispered. She had theorized he'd made more than one. "What is it?" Alistair asked, noticing his change in demeanor. Tony pointed to the screen. "Voldemort's not just a terrorist with a god complex. He's a parasite. He's anchored himself to this world using objects." He pulled up the scan of the locket. Jarvis began running simulations, analyzing the magical signature described in the ledger, comparing it to the energy readings from Godric's Hollow, from Lily's letter, from the faint traces on the Malfoy artifacts. The data coalesced, forming a terrifyingly coherent picture. "He didn't just kill my son," Tony said, his voice dangerously quiet, the fury returning as a cold, precise instrument. "He tore his own soul to pieces to escape death. He thinks that makes him unkillable." He looked at the data streaming across the holographic displays, the magical frequencies, the arcane signatures, the list of potential Horcruxes Lily had theorized about. It was no longer just a hit list of his son's murderers. It was a complex, interconnected system. And systems could be broken. A grim smile touched Tony's lips. "He made a fatal error," he declared, turning to Alistair, his eyes burning with a terrifying new purpose. He turned his soul into an engineering problem. Now war had a schematic. Chapter 4, The Principle of Resonance. The storm above Castle Malachrit was a symphony of Tony's design. Not a natural tempest, but a localized atmospheric disruption created by a dozen high-altitude drones, seeding the clouds with ionized particles. Lightning, raw and untamed, was a power source. The torrential rain served as a coolant and a sensor scrambler. To the wizards below, it was an omen of unparalleled dark magic. To Tony, it was just advantageous battlefield preparation. Energy readings are off the charts. Alistair Finch's voice crackled in his ear, strained with a static that even their shielded comms couldn't fully scrub. The ambient magic here, it's like trying to get a clear radio signal inside a particle accelerator. Jarvis is fighting to maintain telemetry. Inside the Arcane Thrasher Mark II, Tony was a ghost in the machine, his face illuminated by the flickering amber of a dozen tactical displays. The suit, a behemoth of tungsten carbide plating and interwoven silver filaments, stood on a jagged cliff overlooking the decrepit fortress. Its silhouette was an affront to the twisted, Gothic architecture, a thing of clean lines and brutal function against a backdrop of organic decay. "Let him feel powerful," Tony murmured, his eyes scanning thermal, arcane, and kinetic energy readouts. "Arrogant wizards make mistakes." Lily's notes were clear on that. His ego is a bigger vulnerability than any Horcrux. He cannot conceive of a power that is not his own. Lily's elegant script had scrolled across his screen hours ago, a digitized page from her journal. He is a black hole, consuming all light, but even black holes are subject to the laws of physics. They warp space-time. They have gravity. Find the law he is breaking, Tony, and you will find your fulcrum. He had found it. Soul magic, the ultimate taboo, was also the ultimate hack. Voldemort had broken his soul into pieces, creating a network of spiritual anchors. He thought it made him immortal. To a systems engineer like Tony, it just created multiple points of failure. "All systems green, boss," Jarvis's calm, synthesized voice reported, a stark contrast to Alistair's frayed nerves. "Kinetic-to-energy conversion is at 93% efficiency. The storm is providing ample power." "Good. Time for the house call." With a sound like a thunderclap, the suit's repulsors ignited, carving molten furrows into the rock as Tony launched himself across the chasm. He didn't bother with the gates. He smashed through the northern wall of the keep, a 2,000-pound missile of grief and engineering. Stone exploded inwards, ancient wards shattering like glass against a force they were never designed to comprehend. He landed in a crouch in the center of a vast, torchlit hall. Dust and pulverized rock rained down around him. Before him, on a throne carved from what looked unsettlingly like fused bone, sat Lord Voldemort. He was less a man, more a monument to depravity. The chalk-white skin, the serpentine face, the burning crimson eyes that held a chilling flicker of amusement. At his feet, the enormous snake, Nagini, raised her head, tasting the air with a forked tongue. The room was lined with his most loyal Death Eaters, wands raised, their faces a mixture of shock and hateful fury. "A Muggle toy," Voldemort hissed, his voice a sibilant whisper that seemed to echo from the stone itself. "So much noise and fury. Tell me, little machine, who sent you to die so pointlessly?" Tony stood to his full height, the suit's servos whining softly. The faceplate retracted, revealing his own tired, determined face. The ghost of a woman you weren't smart enough to appreciate. And the father of a son you were too cowardly to face on equal terms. Recognition, cold and sharp, dawned in Voldemort's eyes. The amusement curdled into rage. "Stark, the Muggle scientist. Lily spoke of you. A fleeting, foolish dalliance. You dare bring your filthy mechanics into my sanctum." "This isn't a sanctum. It's a mausoleum with bad plumbing," Tony shot back, his faceplate sliding shut. "And I'm here to schedule a permanent vacancy. Jarvis, initiate protocol, requiem." The first spell, a bolt of sickly green light, erupted from Voldemort's wand. Avada Kedavra. The unblockable curse. It wasn't blocked. The moment Jarvis identified the energy signature, the suit's chest plate shimmered, a micro-thin layer of energized crystal, calibrated to the exact frequency of the soul-severing curse, deployed. The green bolt struck the arc reactor housing and didn't stop, it refracted. The single beam of death scattered into a harmless cone of emerald light, splashing against the far wall like a painter's stroke. A collective gasp went through the Death Eaters. Voldemort's snake-like face contorted in disbelief. "Physics, you fossil." Tony's voice boomed through the suit's external speakers. "Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only changed from one form to another. Your unblockable curse is just a directed energy weapon with a nasty payload. You should have diversified." Before Voldemort could react, Tony raised his left gauntlet. A volley of miniature rockets, no bigger than fountain pens, shot out, not at the wizards, but at the ceiling. They exploded in a blinding flash of magnesium flare and a deafening sonic pulse. The Death Eaters cried out, hands flying to their eyes and ears. Their rudimentary senses were completely overwhelmed. Voldemort, however, was something more. He snarled, erecting a shimmering shield of pure force. "Tricks. I am Lord Voldemort. I do not fall for such parlor." He was cut off as Tony's fist, propelled by a targeted repulsor burst, slammed into the shield. It wasn't a magical attack. It was 12 tons of raw kinetic force. The shield buckled, then shattered. The shockwave threw Voldemort from his throne. "You talk too much," Tony grunted, striding forward. The Death Eaters recovered. Curses flew from every direction. Red stunners, purple entral expulsors, bolts of pure concussive force. The suit's countermeasures went into overdrive. A shimmering, hexagonal energy shield absorbed the stunners, its energy level dipping slightly. Chaff launchers fired clouds of silver dust, causing hexes to misfire or fizzle out harmlessly. A jet of fiendfire, a sentient inferno of cursed flame, roared towards him in the shape of a chimera. Jarvis, thermal management. Vents hissed open along the suit's back, releasing a supercooled nitrogen blast that met the fiendfire head-on. Fire and ice warred for a split second before the magical flames, starved of the energy they needed to consume, guttered and died with a pained scream. Tony didn't just stand there and defend. His shoulder-mounted machine gun, firing custom-made silver core rounds, barked to life. It wasn't meant to be lethal. Each bullet was a tranquilizer dart, powerful enough to pierce magical robes and knock a wizard out for a week. Bellatrix Lestrange shrieked as a dart punched through her shoulder, her eyes rolling back in her head as she crumpled to the floor. Another 2 Death Eaters went down before the rest scrambled for cover. Voldemort was back on his feet, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You cannot win, Stark. My magic is absolute." He gestured, and the very stones of the floor rose up, forming 2 massive, hulking golems that charged at Tony. "Cute," Tony said, planting his feet. He met the first golem's charge, catching its stony fists in his gauntlets. The strain was immense. Red warnings flashed on his HUD. "Alistair, status on the secondary objective?" "Almost there, Tony. The sonic emitters are hurting her. Nagini is moving towards the west wing, just as you predicted. She doesn't like the frequency." "Good. Tell me when she's in the kill box." With a surge of power from the arc reactor, Tony superheated his gauntlets. The stone fists of the golem began to glow cherry red, then melted into slag. He pushed, and the creature crumbled into a pile of molten rock. The second golem swung a massive arm. Tony sidestepped, letting the blow slam into the floor where he'd been standing. He fired a single, precise repulsor blast at the golem's knee joint, shattering it. The giant toppled, and Tony brought a boot down on its head, crushing it to gravel. He turned his attention back to Voldemort, whose face now held a sliver of something Tony hadn't seen yet: fear. "It's just you and me now, Tom," Tony said, taking a heavy step forward. "No Horcruxes to hide behind. No followers to die for you. Just a man in a can and a snake-faced monster who murdered a 1-year-old boy in his crib." Every word was a hammer blow, fueled by a year of sleepless nights and burning grief. Voldemort shrieked, a sound of pure hatred, and unleashed a torrent of spells. The air grew thick with power. the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around the Dark Lord. Black tendrils of energy lashed out, striking the suit's armor, leaving sizzling scorch marks and draining power at an alarming rate. "Shields at 30%, sir," Jarvis warned. Multiple microfractures detected in the chest plate. "Just hold on, Jay. She's there," Alistair yelled over the comms. "Nagini is in the antechamber. The resonance cage is active." That was the signal. Tony ignored Voldemort's onslaught, instead raising his right gauntlet. The plating peeled back to reveal not a weapon, but a complex focusing lens surrounded by 3 humming silver prongs. It looked more like a satellite dish than a gun. "What is this?" Voldemort hissed, momentarily pausing his attack, his curiosity overriding his rage. "Another light show?" "This," Tony said, a grim finality in his voice. "This is for Lily. She called it the principle of soul resonance. You broke your soul, Tom. You created a sympathetic link between all the pieces. I'm just going to use it to make a long-distance call." He fired. No beam of light, no explosion. Instead, a single, perfectly tuned wave of energy shot from the emitter. It passed harmlessly through the castle walls, traveling at the speed of light. Miles away, in a hidden antechamber, the wave struck a containment field Alistair had erected. Inside that field was Nagini. The snake convulsed violently. A ghostly black mist erupted from its body as the soul fragment within was targeted not with destructive force, but with a resonant frequency designed to tear it apart on a quantum, spiritual level. And because of the sympathetic link, the effect was instantaneous. Voldemort screamed. It was not a sound of anger or pain, but of pure, existential terror. He dropped his wand, clutching his head as if it were about to split open. A phantom echo of the black mist that had enveloped Nagini now swirled around him, wisps of it bleeding from his eyes and mouth. What did you do?" he gasped, falling to his knees. His form began to flicker, the bonds of magic holding his monstrous body together failing. "I hacked your soul, you son of a bitch," Tony said, walking slowly towards the writhing Dark Lord. The feedback from Nagini's soul fragment being destroyed is creating a cascade failure across your entire fractured spirit. The main piece, the one in you, is destabilizing. You're not dying, Tom. You're being deleted. He stood over Voldemort now. The Dark Lord looked up, his red eyes wide with the horror of a god discovering its own mortality. He saw not a machine, but the face of a father whose vengeance was absolute, logical, and inescapable. The faceplate of the Iron Man suit retracted one last time. "This is for Harry," Tony Stark said, his voice quiet. He raised his hand, the repulsor in his palm glowing with a soft blue light. It was the first weapon he had ever built in that cave, a tool of pure force. He pressed it against Voldemort's forehead. There was a final silent scream, and then a flash of brilliant, clean light. When it faded, there was nothing left but a pile of black robes and a yew wand, which clattered to the stone floor. Silence. The oppressive magical energy that had saturated the castle for decades vanished, like a pressure valve being released. The storm outside began to dissipate. In the sudden quiet, Tony's ragged breathing was the only sound. He stood there for a long moment, the suit's systems powering down to a low hum. The rage that had driven him, the white-hot core of his purpose for the past year, was gone. In its place was not triumph, not satisfaction, but a vast, hollow emptiness. He had done it. He had avenged them. And it hadn't brought them back. It hadn't filled the hole in his life. It had just made it wider. He knelt, his metal knees creaking, and picked up a small silver locket that had fallen from Voldemort's robes. It was Slytherin's locket, the Horcrux he'd had Alistair cleanse a week ago and plant on a captured Death Eater as bait. But inside, something had been added. A tiny, magically moving photograph. It was of a woman with brilliant green eyes and a radiant smile, holding a black-haired baby who was laughing, reaching for the camera. Lily. And Harry. A sound half-sob, half-choke, escaped Tony's lips. He finally let the grief, so long transmuted into fuel, wash over him. Tony. Alistair's voice, now crystal clear, came through the comms. He sounded shaken but relieved. It's over. The magical signatures, they're gone. You did it. Tony took a shuddering breath, staring at the photo. Yeah, I did it. That's good, Alistair said, his voice suddenly tight with urgency. Because we have a problem. A big one. I'm patched into the Ministry's emergency broadcast network. They're not hailing you as a hero, Tony. Their auras are mobilizing the entire Department of Magical Law Enforcement. What's the problem? Tony asked, his voice rough with emotion. Their reconnaissance spells must have only registered the energy spikes and the aftermath. They don't know who you are or what you did, Alistair said, his words coming faster now. They've designated the unknown armored entity that just single-handedly obliterated the most powerful Dark Lord in history as a Code Omega threat. They think you're the new Dark Lord. A burst of static crackled, then Alistair's voice returned, grim. Tony, the British Ministry of Magic just declared you public enemy #1.